Hello everybody, my name is Sniping is Fun, and I welcome you all back to the next character I want to talk about in the series of newcomer ideas for the upcoming Super Smash Bros. Game, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, on the Nintendo Switch. And as I mentioned in the last video when we talked about Leon Scott Kennedy from the Resident Evil franchise, which was my 57th character, my 58th character was going to be a return to the Castlevania franchise, which it hasn't been too long since I talked about a character from that. Because my 50th character, the return to me doing the series after the small hiatus, after E3, was Simon Belmont. And I basically mentioned in that video there are a few other Castlevania characters I wanted to talk about. And this is going to be the first one in that series. And it's going to be my character number 58, Soma Cruz. And just like always, 3 separate categories. Why does the character make sense for Smash Brothers? Moveset ideas and percentage chance I can see him getting in. So let's just go into the first category already. Why does Soma Cruz make sense to be in Smash Brothers? Why would they, let's hypothetically say, they choose him over Simon Belmont? And why would they choose him in the first place? What makes him such a big choice to include over Simon Belmont, or just as himself? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean he's getting picked over Simon Belmont. Maybe they put both of them in there together. I have no clue. But let's just say, why would he make sense as the inclusion to represent the franchise if it wasn't Simon Belmont, which chances are it would be. But let's just go and dive into the reasons for why he makes sense for Smash Bros. In general. Let's just take comparing him to Simon Belmont out of the equation, and let's just say, go into the first category and say, why does he make sense? Why does Soma Cruz make sense to be in Smash Bros.? Well, the first major reason is he represents 2 major Nintendo-oriented Castlevania games, Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance and Dawn of Sorrow on the DS. 2 majorly popular, huge, Nintendo Castlevania games. They're not like as iconic as, like the original Nintendo or Super Castlevania 4 and whatnot on, the Super Nintendo and whatnot. A lot of the older classic ones, or even Symphony of the Night for that matter. But they are iconic games in the series in their own right. They are popular games in the series in their own right. And they are major games in the series in their own right because they are some of the later entries in the series. They are near the end of, before the series went on its hiatus that it's on now, or, being finished. Whether or not, the original creator left or not, and I was making Bloodstained. Or, Konami is just never going to do the franchise ever again. They rebooted it with Lord of the Shadow and whatnot. It's iconic. They are iconic in their own right because it's near the end of the timeline. Soma Cruz's games. So they're iconic, popular, major Nintendo-oriented Castlevania games of a series that has a long-standing history being iconic on Nintendo since the days of, Super Nintendo, the original Nintendo and whatnot back in the 80s and 90s. And 64, then the Game Boy Advance, DS, the Wii, and so on and so forth. It's an iconic franchise closely knit to Nintendo. That's the reason why Konami specifically, or Castlevania specifically, deserves to be in Smash Brothers. But his games are 2 major ones that were released later on, and they got very well received. A lot of people loved those 2 games, especially Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance. They're basically a Game Boy Advance DS super major Nintendo-oriented Castlevania games that continue off that Symphony of the Night, like Metroidvania RPG style Castlevania games that a lot of fans love. Some fans love that style more so than the classic, platforming Castlevania style of like the original games and whatnot. So there are fans of both. There are fans of one or the other. So it's like you represent a very popular style of Castlevania, and his games are very majorly well received in the series, and they are both on Nintendo. He's important to the series. He is an important character storyline wise to the series because technically he is Dracula, the main villain of the entire series, and technically he represents Dracula. So it's a way of getting Dracula represented in Smash Brothers is by representing him because he is technically a reincarnation of him. So it's like including a hero rep that's technically a villain rep that's kind of alongside he's a good guy alongside like what the Belmont clan was, alongside Julius and everything in his current day and time, like it was 2000. His storyline takes place in like modern day futuristic time, like 2030 sometime, alongside Julius Belmont and whatnot, but he's the reincarnation of the villain since the beginning of the series, Dracula. So it's like he's a good guy and a bad guy all in one, and represents and encompasses both sides of the series, which I think is a pretty cool representation for Castlevania. It's not just the Belmont clan, Simon Belmont with maybe a Richter or Trevor or Julius or whatever costume, just the good guy side. It represents both. He's a good guy with basically being a reincarnation of a bad guy. It's both sides. It's the yin and the yang, the good and the bad, the black and the white, super good guy and bad guy type of situation. And I think that's a cool little nod to the series by representing a character that represents both sides of the coin. And he's popular too. And like I said, I don't mention popularity being a major thing to represent characters getting into Smash Brothers. I think relevancy and recency are a lot more important. But I think popularity is just as important in terms of third parties, more so than in terms of like the Nintendo characters, where I think relevancy and recency are more major than popularity, but popularity matters. But I think in third parties, I think both of them kind of coincide with each other anyways. So that's basically why I think he deserves to be in, like why he makes sense. He's on 2 popular, very well received Nintendo Castlevania games that represent a certain part in the series, near its end. He represents a good and bad side because technically he represents Dracula, and he's an iconic character to the series. Maybe not as iconic as the Belmont clan, as Simon specifically, but he's one of the major characters of the series, and a lot of people do know who he is. Moveset ideas now. Now, this is a character I had to do a little bit of research on. I love the Castlevania series. I've mentioned it multiple times. I've played multiple games in the series, but I've only partially played one of his games. I haven't gotten around to Aria of Sorrow yet. I've played a decent chunk of Dawn of Sorrow, and I did base his moveset more so off of Dawn of Sorrow, but I did a little bit of research on Aria of Sorrow. So it's kind of a mixed moveset between both his games, but it represents more so Dawn of Sorrow, even though some of the weapons kind of carry over between one game and another anyways. But his moveset is heavily based off like the Metroidvania style of Castlevania, like different weapons, equipping weapons, special attacks, summoning like souls and demon type stuff, kind of. I didn't put that too much in his moveset. That's more so Final Smash, which I'll get to in a minute. But I represented more so the weapons. And his smash attacks, I'm in the moveset now, smash attacks are all the melee-based weapons he gets. A lot of the melee-based weapons, and it's going to be like the Inklings. It's going to be where certain attacks like left A, right A, down A in the air, A in the ground, standard A, charged A are all different weapons. And you can equip multiple different weapons in this game. It's not like back in the days of like Simon Belmont where you just have the whip, or you play as a certain character that has just a certain fighting style to him. It's different weapons equipable. And if you played Symphony of Night or Harmony of Dissonance, I think I've got that one right, Aria of Sorrow, Dawn of Sorrow, any of the Metroidvania, Castlevania games, you equip different weapons to your character. So basically it represents different weapons. And like I said, physical weapons, up close melee based weapons. He basically uses the likes of a katana, his fists, he uses swords, great swords, and rapiers and whatnot. And I basically just picked one of each one. I'm going to say he uses a sword, and it's the cutlass. He's going to use the cutlass as his sword. He has the great sword, which will be the Balmung. He uses a katana, the Masamune. He uses nunchucks, the nunchakus. And he also be able to punch, and it's going to be a mix between the Mac punch, which is just more so like a charged up punch, and the Kaiser Knuckles, which I think is a combo of punches, if I recall. I forgot exactly what it is. So he can do standard punches, and then you can charge up a punch and punch someone, or you can do like a combo punch type of thing. And obviously the rapier would be, I think it might be the S-Stock, but I'm also thinking just to kind of throw a little bit of a nod to the Belmont clan, he uses the whip sword. So he'll use the whip sword, and it turns, obviously the sword extends and turns into a whip. So I'd say that probably is a more, iconic weapon for him to represent part of the Belmont clan in his moveset. So there's that. So his melee weapons will all be different. And I'm sorry if you're seeing me look down, because I have the notes down here for the characters and what I'm saying, because I have to kind of, in order to keep track of stuff, I write down what I'm talking about. But yes, his physical weapons, melee-based up-close weapons, would be his smash attacks. He'd use a great sword, a standard sword, a rapier, nunchucks. He'll punch with his fists. He'll have a katana. So basically, that's like 4 different types of swords, punching with his fists and using a katana. That's basically what his smash attacks will be. His special attacks will be all the ranged weapons of his ranged weapons he can use. So basically he'll have a spear. I use the Guyborg. He'll use a knife, which would basically be the combat knife. He'll throw a little knife. So it's kind of like, I think I mentioned that something similar to that effect for Simon Belmont. He'll throw the great axe, which will be like the curving motion, like a standard axe I mentioned with Simon Belmont. He has a gun, the silver gun, which is like for fighting vampires. He'll pull out the gun and shoot. He uses a boomerang. He uses a tomahawk. He uses a chakram. So basically, it's the ranged weapons from Castlevania, which is basically what the same thing I did with Simon Belmont. The difference is Simon Belmont's smash attacks all focused on the whip. While obviously Soma Cruz's here focuses on all the different weapons you can get in the Metroidvania games and his games specifically. So smash attacks are all melee based up close range weapons. Special attacks are long range distance throwing weapons. I didn't include any of the souls of him summoning like demons and monsters, like throwing bones and everything in this specific moveset, but I feel some of those would be thrown into his moveset somewhere, whether it's smash attacks or special attacks. You can go either which way. I didn't include any of them there because I mostly wanted to focus on his weaponry. I did not want to focus on the magical powers. I'm sorry. You can throw some of those in there. My moveset didn't include them, but I'm mentioning right here now. I think him summoning different beasts, different souls would be in his moveset anyways. I just didn't mention them in mine. Sorry to say. So before we get to the final smash, like I said, melee-based attacks, great swords, regular swords, katanas, rapiers, punching, and nunchakus. His special attacks would be his throwing weapons and ranged weapons like the spear, throwing the axe, shooting his gun, throwing his knives, throwing chakrams or boomerangs or tomahawks or something. I'd say if you want to balance it down to maybe just 5, I'd say obviously keep the gun, keep the knife, keep the spear, and keep the axe, and then throw in the boomerang because we haven't seen a character in Smash Bros. That really uses a boomerang. He doesn't need a tomahawk. He already is throwing an axe, and a tomahawk is basically a form of an axe, and the chakrams we really don't need anyway. So those 5 would probably, if they centered it only on 5, there you go. Now, in terms of his final smash, I gave him Dracula's power. He is the reincarnation of Dracula. He is a form of Dracula. You have to represent it somehow in his moveset. So he just summons on Dracula's power, and this is the bad ending, which is really weird because I'm making him more out to be a bad guy in my moveset with giving him his power, because I'm talking about like the bad ending of Dawn of Sorrow, where he gives into Dracula's power, turns into Dracula himself, and becomes the bad guy that Julius and whatnot has to go and kill. And he basically gives into, Dracula's power. So he'll just charge up, he'll be all demonic, and then maybe he'll start throwing all his weaponry everywhere, summoning demons to attack the players, or some sort of, I'd say a cutscene based one. He catches them with some sort of sword swipe, like, and then he's like, and then basically the players just get blown off the stage by explosions and death and demons just dragging them off the stage or something. I have no idea. It's basically the ending of Dawn of Sorrow is like the bad ending is him giving into the powers after his girlfriend dies and just saying like, I don't care anymore, and turning evil. I'd say give that his final smash. It'd be freaking awesome. He's Dracula anyway, so let him fight like Dracula. There you go. So yeah, that's the moveset. And now let's get on to percentage chance I could see him actually getting in the game. Hyping him up. He seems like a cool character. He fits in quite well. But honestly, people, if they do include the Castlevania rep, it's likely going to be Simon Belmont, possibly with some alternate costumes like Trevor, Christopher, Julius, Richter. Maybe Soma Cruz could work as an alternate costume for Simon Belmont. I know it's just whip with the throwing axes and everything, and it's not all his weaponry. But it's the best thing to get if we can't get an actual version of him anyways, I'm sorry to say. But yes, Simon Belmont is more likely. He is the most likely option. I think Soma Cruz is one of the second, third, fourth category, ranking base-wise, who should be in the game. But I'm going to give him about like a 40, 45, 50% chance. Actually, let's just leave it here. 50% chance. I gave Simon Belmont like 80, 85 because he's just so iconic, and there's rumors going around that he's going to be in the game, and obviously he's one of the major missing third-party characters from the NES era that's not yet in Smash Brothers, but he's the most likely option. He's the most iconic in terms of Nintendo because most of the games in the series are Simon Belmont-oriented Castlevania games. Soma Cruz only represents 2, and I give him a 50% chance, and he's lower because it's been years since we saw him as well. His last appearance was like in 2005, Dawn of Sorrow on the DS. That is 13 years ago. Wait. Yeah, 13 years ago. It's been since the last time we saw Soma Cruz in a Castlevania game, except for like spin-offs like Harmony of Despair and whatnot. Like little side games here and there, but the last mainline Castlevania game, his game's been like 13 years ago, his last one on the DS. I think that hurts him because he's not very recent. He's not very frequent in the series, only 2 games, and I know he represents the Metroidvania games, but the iconic part of the series is Castlevania, like the days of like the NES and Super Nintendo, the classic gameplay style. That's what a lot of people remember the series for. And most people who know the Metroidvania style know it from Symphony of the Night, not really any of the DS or Game Boy Advance games, sorry to say. So 50% chance for him. He's still very possible if they don't go for a Simon Belmont, but chances are they're going to go for a Simon Belmont. So there you go. So that is it for Soma Cruz from Castlevania. And that's it for my 58th character on this list. Put in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys want to see Soma Cruz in the game? Do you think he makes sense? What about my moveset ideas? I know I didn't really include souls. Do you want his moveset to feature souls and demon monsters and summoning monsters and everything to attack for him? Or is my moveset basically focusing on the weaponry better, or maybe intertwining a mix of it? Percentage chance is 50% too high, too low? Does he even deserve to be in? So and so forth. Just have fun down there and discuss it. And that's it for Soma Cruz. That's it for character number 58. And stay tuned for character number 59 when I jump back into the world of indie gaming with quote from Cave Story. Bye.